the sound of the slap did not echo the way I expected it to. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times over 26 years, and in every version I ever built in my head, the sound was thunder. Something that shook the windows. Something everyone in the room would remember for the rest of their lives. It wasn't like that at all. It was small. A crack, sharp and dry, swallowed almost instantly by the enormous marble ceiling of the ballroom, as if the room itself refused to give my father's cruelty any more weight than it deserved. My name is Rear Admiral Harper Bennett, United States Navy, and I did not raise my hand to my father. I raised my chin. The Navy SEAL Foundation Gala had been underway for perhaps 40 minutes when it happened. Round tables draped in white linen, each one anchored by a small brass placard bearing the name of a unit, a foundation chapter, a family sponsoring a scholarship in someone's memory. A string quartet played something soft and forgettable near the far wall, the kind of music meant to fill silence without ever demanding attention for itself. Men and women moved between conversations in dress blues and evening gowns, carrying themselves with the particular ease of people who had learned long ago how to hold grief and pride in the very same body, without spilling either one. I had come alone, as I always did, in my service dress blues, no cover indoors, ribbons squared, one silver star gleaming on each shoulder board, catching the chandelier light every time I turned my head. A young lieutenant near the coat check had saluted me on my way in, sharp and a little nervous, the way junior officers always are around flag rank, and I'd returned it easily. The motion so worn into muscle memory by Zen that it required no thought at all. It was, I would only understand hours later, the last entirely uncomplicated moment of that entire evening. I found my table, exchanged a few quiet words with a retired vice admiral I'd worked with years earlier on a joint task force, and let myself, for a little while, simply enjoy being in a room built for people like me, people who understood without needing it explained exactly what a folded flag weighs in your hands, or what it costs to write a letter home that never gets easier no matter how many times you've written one before. I saw him before he saw me. Colonel Marcus Bennett, United States Army, retired, stood near the head table with a drink in one hand and the same rigid, immovable posture I remembered from every dinner table of my childhood, shoulders back, chin level. A man who had built his entire identity around never once looking like he needed anything from anyone. Beside him, my mother Diane, smaller than I remembered, her silver hair pulled back into a tight, careful knot, her eyes already scanning the room the way they always had, watching for the mood shifts that told her when to speak and when to stay quiet. And near the bar, half turned away from both of them, my brother Tyler, in a suit that no longer fit him quite the way it should have, nursing something amber and looking at nothing in particular. I had not planned to approach them. I had told myself, on the drive over, that if I saw them at all, I would offer a single polite nod and let the evening carry me past them like water moving around stone. I had rehearsed that sentence to myself in the car. A nod. Nothing more. You don't owe this room an explanation of who you've become. But my father saw me first, and something in his face changed the instant recognition arrived. Not the star on my shoulder, yet not that specific detail, just my face. 26 years older than the last time he'd looked at it directly, and apparently still somehow unforgivable. "You," he said, and the single syllable carried enough weight that 3 nearby tables turned toward us. I stopped where I was, my hands loosely at my sides, weight balanced evenly, the way 26 years of training had taught my body to stand in any room, under any pressure. "Hello, Dad." "You have some nerve." His voice climbed the way it always did the moment he sensed an audience assembling around him, the way a performer's voice rises the moment the house lights find him. "Showing up here, after everything." "I was invited," I said, keeping my own voice level. "I've surfed with half the men and women in this room." "You were never invited into this family," he said, and the words landed exactly where he intended them to land. In the old wound, the one that had never fully closed, no matter how many oceans how many deployments, how many years I put between myself and this man. You made your choice a long time ago. You chose the Navy over your own blood. You chose to embarrass this family. You chose to walk away and never look back. You threw me out, Dad. I said it evenly. Not a plea. Not even an accusation anymore, just a fact laid flat on the table between us, like a photograph neither of us particularly wanted to look at, but that existed whether we looked or not. His hand moved before either one of us could stop it. The slap caught me full across the left cheek, and for one suspended moment the entire room dissolved into a white ring of sound. Somewhere behind me a fork clattered against a plate. The quartet faltered mid-phrase and went silent. I felt heat bloom fast across my skin, and underneath that heat, something much older rose to meet it. An 18-year-old girl standing in a doorway with a canvas duffel bag being shoved hard into her arms. A porch light shrinking behind her into the dark. I did not touch my face. I did not step back. I did not give him the tears he had been hunting for since I was 17 years old. I stood there, in the center of that enormous, suddenly silent room, and I let the quiet do exactly what 26 years of discipline had trained it to do. Hold the line. The August air that year never really let go, even after the sun went down. Thick, humming with cicadas, pressing itself against the windows of the house I grew up in like it wanted permission to come inside. Tyler had come home that afternoon with his acceptance letter to West Point clutched in both hands, the envelope already soft at the corners from how many times he'd folded and unfolded it on the walk from the mailbox. And my father stood in the middle of our living room, taller than I had ever seen him stand, chest out, eyes bright, as though the Academy had written to him personally instead of to a 17-year-old son. My mother hovered near the kitchen doorway, a dish towel twisted tight in both hands, smiling the same small, practiced smile she always wore whenever the entire room belonged to my father's mood, and everyone else's job was simply not to disturb it. I was 18 that summer. I had a plan of my own, one I had rehearsed silently for weeks in the mirror of my bedroom, not law school. Not the political science degree he had been steering me toward since I was 12 years old, with the same quiet, relentless pressure a river uses to carve a canyon. I wanted the Navy. A uniform, yes, the kind of life he had always said mattered more than any other kind. Just not the version he had already picked out for me without asking. I want to enlist, I told him, once the celebration for Tyler had quieted enough for me to find an opening. In the Navy. The room went still in a very different way than it had gone still for Tyler's letter. You want to what? His voice dropped low, which I had learned over 18 years was always somehow worse than when it rose. I want to serve, I said, keeping my chin up the way I'd practiced. I just want to choose how. Women don't belong on ships in a war zone, Harper. He said my name like it was already a disappointment on its own, separate from anything I might do with it. You'll end it behind a desk somewhere, filing paperwork if you're lucky enough to even get that far. That's not service. That's a costume. His jaw hardened, a muscle working visibly beneath his cheek, the vein on his temple beginning to show. You think you're special? You are nothing without this family. Without me. Tyler, 17 and already fluent in the art of pleasing our father, smirked from his corner of the room, still holding his acceptance letter like a shield. My mother lowered her eyes to the dish towel in her hands, and her silence, I would come to understand years later, had always been louder than anything my father ever shouted. I'm not you, Dad, I said, and my voice shook despite every effort I made to keep it steady. I won't live your life for you. I'll find my own. The blow came fast. My cheek burned white hot, but the words that followed cut deeper than his palm ever could have on its own. Get out. You're no daughter of mine. He was in my room within the minute, yanking drawers open, throwing clothes into an old canvas duffel bag with a violence that told me this had been sitting coiled inside him for years, simply waiting for a reason to strike. He thrust the bag into my arms and pointed toward the front door. My mother did not move from the kitchen doorway. Tyler's grin had not faded even slightly. That was the last night I ever slept under that roof. I walked down our street with the porch light shrinking smaller behind me, rage burning hotter than grief in my chest. Past the darkened windows of neighbors who had probably heard every word and would say nothing to anyone about it, the way people in that neighborhood always said nothing. Somewhere under that heavy, humming summer sky, I made myself a promise, not for him, never again for him. For the girl he had just tried, with a single slap and a duffel bag, to erase completely. I rented a room above a laundromat 2 blocks from the bus depot, the kind of place that smelled permanently of damp carpet and somebody else's cigarettes, where the mattress had springs sharp enough to leave marks on my back by morning. The first few nights, I cried with my fist pressed hard against my mouth so the man in the next room wouldn't hear me through the thin wall between us. But underneath the grief, something else was building, slow and steady, a low current that didn't want tears anymore. It wanted movement. It wanted somewhere to go. 3 weeks later, that current walked me straight through the door of a Navy recruiting office wedged between a barbershop and a nail salon and a strip mall I'd passed 100 times without ever really seeing it. And I signed my name across the enlistment papers with a hand that did not shake, even though every other part of me was shaking plenty underneath my jacket. I didn't enlist because I believed I would succeed. I enlisted because I refused to fail in front of a man who, as far as I knew, wasn't even watching anymore. Boot camp at Great Lakes nearly broke me in the first 2 weeks. I was slender, unremarkable on paper, a girl with nowhere left to go, and more than one instructor decided within the first 24 hours that I wasn't going to last the month. I could feel their doubt like something physical, a weight pressing on the back of my neck through every run, every inspection, every early morning muster in weather that seemed determined to punish us all equally. Every time I heard someone mutter that I was too soft, too small, too something, I pushed harder. When my lungs burned raw, I found another quarter-mile somewhere inside myself. When my arms shook through push-ups until my vision blurred at the edges, I held the position 1 more second than I believed I had left in me. At night, lying flat in the rack, aching in places I hadn't known could ache, I heard my father's voice waiting for me in the dark, patient as ever. "You're no daughter of mine." Ugh, I used it. I fed on it the way you feed a fire that happens to be the only thing keeping you from freezing. Somewhere inside that blur of exhaustion and cold showers and endless drills that all bled together into one long gray week, something in me shifted, quietly, without any single dramatic moment to mark it. I stopped trying to prove him wrong. I started almost without noticing the change, trying to prove myself right. There was a moment, near the end of week 5, that I still think about more than almost anything else from those first months. We were running a timed obstacle course in the rain, boots heavy with mud, and I went down hard on the cargo net, my ankle twisting under me in a way that sent white light shooting up my leg. For a second, I just lay there in the wet grass, staring up at a gray sky, and I honestly considered, for the first time since I'd signed those enlistment papers, simply staying down. Then I thought about the porch light shrinking behind me on that August night, and about how satisfying it would be in some small, twisted corner of my father's mind to hear that his daughter had washed out of boot camp inside her first 2 months. I got up. I finished the course on an ankle that turned out, 3 days later, in medical, to be a hairline fracture I'd run on without telling anyone. It healed. Everything healed eventually if you didn't stop moving long enough to let it seize up around the break. That was, I understand now, the first real step toward becoming someone he would never again be able to erase. Her name was Elena Cruz, and she was the first person in the entire United States Navy who looked at me like I might actually amount to something, rather than like a problem someone else would eventually have to solve. She was already a Master Chief Petty Officer by the time I met her, the kind of senior enlisted sailor that younger officers were quietly terrified of, and older officers quietly deferred to without ever fully admitting it out loud. She found me one evening on the pier at Naval Station Norfolk, sitting alone after a punishing physical training evaluation. staring out at the gray water like it owed me some kind of explanation I hadn't yet worked out how to ask for. "You're Bennett," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Master Chief." "You ran that PT test like somebody was chasing you." "Somebody was, Master Chief." She studied me for a long moment, the kind of look that seems to measure a person all the way down to the studs, checking for rot before deciding whether the foundation could bear any weight. "Good," she finally said, settling onto the pier beside me without asking permission, the way senior enlisted sailors have always done with junior sailors worth their time. "Keep running towards something instead of away from it, and you'll go a lot further than most people expect." Elena Cruz became over the years that followed something I hadn't had since I was 17 years old. Someone in my corner who wasn't there because blood obligated her to be, but because she'd chosen it deliberately. The way you choose to keep a good tool once you've tested it and trust it. It was Elena who first suggested 6 years into my enlisted career that I apply for officer candidate school. This after I'd made petty officer first class ahead of nearly everyone in my year group. After 2 deployments and a fitness report that used the word exceptional more times than any junior sailor's report usually did. "You've got the eye for it," she told me over coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since morning watch, bitter enough to strip paint. "The way you read a room before you ever open your mouth. The way people follow you even when you're not the one giving the orders yet. Officers can be taught tactics, Bennett." "Nobody can teach that other thing you've got," I applied. I was accepted into OCS at 24, commissioned as an ensign at 25. Not through Annapolis, not through any of the polished paths my father would have recognized or respected, but up through the deck plates the long way. The way that meant something a little different every single day I put that uniform on. "Mustang," Elena told me with something that looked suspiciously like pride the day I pinned on my new rank insignia in a hallway that smelled like fresh paint and floor wax. "That's what they call officers who came up the way you did. Means you know both sides of that wardroom door, ensign. Means nobody in this fleet can tell you a sea story you haven't already lived through yourself." OCS itself was its own particular kind of hard, different from boot camp in almost every way that mattered. It wasn't my body they were testing anymore so much as my judgment. Could I read a chart under pressure? Could I write an order that a room full of exhausted sailors could actually execute at 3 in the morning? Could I stand in front of people twice my age with real combat experience and give them direction they'd trust enough to follow? Some of my classmates had come straight from 4-year universities, full of theory and confidence, and a certain kind of polish I simply didn't have and had stopped trying to fake. I had 6 years of deckplate experience. Instead, 6 years of knowing exactly what it felt like to be the one following an order that didn't make sense. And I built everything I did as a new officer candidate on top of that knowledge instead of apologizing for not having the other kind. One of my instructors, a hard-edged lieutenant commander named Ose, who rarely handed out praise to anyone, pulled me aside after a field exercise in my final week. "You give orders like someone who's had to follow a bad one," he said. "Don't lose that when the stripes get heavier, Bennett. Most people do." I never forgot it. Across 26 years and every rank that followed, I tried, as best I could, not to. I was 28 the first time I deployed as part of an individual augmentee unit, embedded with an Army logistics battalion outside Kandahar. It was a program most civilians never even heard the name of. Navy officers pulled off ships and out of shore commands and dropped into someone else's war because the Army needed bodies with the right skill sets and, in the middle of a war, didn't much care which branch's patch happened to be sewn onto the shoulder wearing them. The soldiers around me didn't quite know what to make of a Navy lieutenant riding along in their convoy. I was the outsider twice over that year. A sailor among soldiers, a woman among men who had, more than a few of them admitted later, never served alongside one in an active combat zone before. I felt their doubt the same way I'd felt it back at boot camp. A low current running under every interaction, never spoken aloud, but never fully absent either. Then, on a stretch of road outside a village whose name I still don't say out loud if I can help it, An improvised explosive device tore straight into the second vehicle in our convoy. The air went white, then black, then suddenly violently full of sound, screaming metal. Someone shouting for a corpsman over the ringing in my own ears. Dust so thick and so fast I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. I found Petty Officer Danny Kessler half-pinned inside the wreckage, his leg trapped at an angle no legs should ever bend. Blood already soaking through his uniform faster than I let myself look at directly. I don't remember consciously deciding to move toward him. I only remember that my legs were already running before the rest of me had finished catching up. I got him free. I got him onto my back somehow, adrenaline doing the work my muscles alone never could have managed, and I carried him 200 meters toward the tree line while rounds cracked somewhere behind us. His blood soaking hot through the back of my uniform, his voice a broken whisper against my shoulder, praying words he probably didn't fully believe he'd live long enough to finish saying. We reached cover. I went down hard onto my knees beside him, gasping for air that didn't feel like it was reaching my lungs fast enough, my arms shaking uncontrollably. Both hands pressed hard against the wound in his thigh until the corpsman finally reached us and pulled me gently back so he could work. Kessler lived. After that night, something in the way the men in that unit looked at me changed, slowly but unmistakably. Suspicion gave way, day by day, to something much closer to trust. I didn't lead by shouting after that, not that I ever had much, but even less afterward. I led by being the one who moved first, who ate last whenever rations ran short, who carried more weight than my fair share whenever the load on any given day got heavy enough to matter. Respect, I learned out there on that dusty, sun-blasted road, is never simply given to anyone. It's built, one carried weight at a time, one long night at a time, until it can hold real weight of its own. The battalion commander, an Army lieutenant colonel named Rios, who had barely tolerated my presence for the first month of the deployment, pulled me aside a week after the convoy attack. We stood outside the command tent while the generator hummed and the desert cooled fast, the way it always did after dark. "I want you to know something, Lieutenant," he said, not quite looking at me directly, the way men of his generation sometimes struggled to say a genuine compliment out loud without softening it first somehow. I didn't want a Navy augmentee running logistics for my battalion. Figured you'd be a paperwork officer who'd never carried anything heavier than a briefcase in her life. He paused. I was wrong about that. I'll put it in writing if you want me to. You don't have to, sir. I know I don't have to, he said. That's exactly why I'm going to. He did. That fitness report followed me for the rest of my career, quietly opening doors I wouldn't fully understand the significance of until years later. A training slot here, a follow-on assignment there. The kind of institutional trust that accumulates slowly and then, almost all at once, becomes an entire career. I didn't know it yet, standing outside that tent in the cooling dark. But Lieutenant Colonel Rios's grudging admission was the first brick in a foundation that would eventually hold the weight of a star. Years passed the way deployments do, blurring together into one long corridor of dusty outposts and distant explosions and letters, so many letters, written by my own hand to parents who would never again hear their child's key turn in the front door lock. I made lieutenant commander at 32. I made commander at 37. Each promotion ceremony followed the exact same shape in one particular way that never changed, no matter how many years passed. My side of the room was always empty. I stood at attention while other officers had mothers pin new boards onto their shoulders with trembling, proud hands, while fathers gripped their sons' and daughters' hands with unashamed pride in front of everyone, and I saluted and smiled through it for the photographs, and went back to my quarters alone every single time. The ache was sharp the first few times it happened. It dulled eventually into something closer to scar tissue. Still there if you pressed on it directly. Still tender in certain weather, but no longer capable of stopping me cold in my tracks the way it once had. I built a different kind of family in its place, out of necessity first and then, slowly, out of something closer to real love. Sailors who knew me not as the daughter Marcus Bennett had disowned in a hot August doorway, but simply as the officer who brought them home safely, whenever that was within her power to do. Elena Cruz, who retired the same year I made commander and still called me without fail every single Christmas morning. Danny Kessler, who named his first daughter after a river in Kandahar province and sent me a photograph every year on her birthday with the exact same 3 words written on the back, "Still here, ma'am." Somewhere in that long stretch of years, my career quietly shifted into work I couldn't discuss at dinner parties even if I had had anyone left to have dinner parties with. Naval Special Warfare Liaison postings. Classified operational planning, bullets, the kind of assignments where a name exists on very short lists in secure rooms and essentially nowhere else. My family, if that word still meant anything by then, heard nothing from me and knew nothing about me, because there was nothing public left to know and because none of them had ever once in all those years thought to go looking. I remember one promotion ceremony in particular, the day I made commander, standing in a hangar bay with the wind coming in cold off the water and a rear admiral I barely knew reading the citation in a flat official voice that somehow still managed to catch on certain words. I looked out at the small crowd gathered for the occasion, colleagues, a couple of chiefs I'd served with twice over. Elena Cruz in the second row wearing her own retired blues just for the occasion, and I let myself feel just for a moment exactly how far I'd come from a mattress with springs that left marks on my back. Danny Kessler flew in for that one on his own dime 3 years after Kandahar, walking with a cane he'd need for the rest of his life and a grin that hadn't changed at all since the desert. He stood at the back, out of uniform by then, a photograph of his newborn daughter already tucked into his jacket pocket to show anyone who'd hold still long enough to look. Afterward, he shook my hand for a long time, longer than a handshake usually lasts, and didn't say much of anything at all. He didn't need to. Some debts don't require words to be understood by both people holding them. That was the family that showed up for me, ceremony after ceremony, year after year, while my actual family sat 2 states away and never once picked up a phone. I should say something here about my brother because for a long time I told myself he simply didn't matter to this story anymore. I was wrong about that, and it took me most of 26 years to understand exactly how wrong. Tyler went to West Point the year after I left home. He graduated commissioned as an Army officer just as our father had always assumed he would, and served 8 years before quietly separating from the service at the rank of captain, a rank that would have quietly devastated our father if he had ever once said so out loud, which of course he never did. Not to Tyler's face, and probably not even fully to himself. Tyler had gone into the Army, I came to understand much later, largely to please a man who could not actually be pleased by anyone, and when the pleasing didn't work, and the passion for the life had never truly been his own to begin with, he simply let it go. He never called me, not once, across 26 years. But Danny Kessler told me something once tucked into the corner of one of those annual birthday photographs that I didn't fully know what to do with for a long time afterward. Tyler had reached out to a few of my old commands over the years, quietly always asking after me in the vaguest possible terms, never leaving a callback number, never identifying himself as anything more specific than a family member. Just checking from a distance. He never once found the courage to close that I was still alive somewhere out there in the world. I didn't know what to make of that for a very long time. I'm still not entirely certain I do. But I kept the knowledge of it folded away somewhere safe, the way you keep a key to a door you aren't ready to open yet, but aren't quite ready to throw away either. The morning the invitation arrived, I nearly tossed it into the stack of formal mail already cluttering the corner of my desk without giving it a second look. Heavy cardstock embossed lettering. The exact kind of thing designed to impress retired officers and generous donors in equal measure. Then, my eyes caught the honoree list printed inside and my hand went still. Colonel Marcus Bennett, U.S. Army, retired, for distinguished service and decades of dedicated support to veteran communities nationwide. 26 years had passed since the night he shoved a duffel bag hard into my arms and told me I was no daughter of his. In those 26 years, I had buried friends far too young, planned operations I still can't fully discuss at any dinner table, carried scars he would never see, and, if I was honest with myself, wouldn't have wanted to. I had genuinely believed, most days, that I had buried him too, or at least buried whatever power the old version of him used to hold over me. And yet there it was, printed in gold ink on heavy paper, the Navy SEAL Foundation Gala. A room that would be full, this time, of the very people who had actually shaped who I eventually became. I could have thrown the invitation directly into the trash. No one would have blamed me for it, least of all, myself. But something steady and insistent, low in my chest, said I had to go, not for revenge, and honestly not for reconciliation either, not really, for truth. The particular kind of truth that refuses to stay buried forever, no matter how carefully and how deeply you think you've dug the hole. There is one more detail about that gala worth mentioning here because it matters enormously for everything that happened afterward. 3 months before that invitation ever reached my desk, my name had finally appeared for the first time in years in the public record. My promotion to Rear Admiral, lower half, had been confirmed by the United States Senate and published, as every flag officer promotion is in the congressional record. It wasn't exactly headline news, not the kind of thing that trends anywhere online, but it was there, findable, on the record, if anyone in my family had ever once thought to go looking for it. None of them had. Not once, across 26 years, had a single person in that house ever typed my name into a search engine to see what had become of me. I sat with that invitation on my kitchen table for 3 full days before I answered it. I called Elena first, the way I called her before every decision that actually mattered. "You don't need his approval," she said, without me even fully explaining why I was calling. She always did have a way of skipping straight to the center of a thing. "You never did, but you might need to see, with your own eyes, that you don't need it." Sometimes a person has to stand in the room to actually believe that for themselves. And if it goes badly? Bennett. She used my last name the way she always had, the way that still, after everything, made me sit up a little straighter. You've walked into rooms with a lot worse odds than a bad dinner conversation. Go stand in the room. I RSVP'd that same night. Ahem. I told myself driving to the tailor 2 days later to have my dress blues pressed and fitted for the first time in over a year, that I was simply going to honor an invitation extended to a flag officer, nothing more complicated than that. I mostly believed it. Mostly. The morning of the gala, I stood in front of my mirror considerably longer than I meant to. The woman staring back at me barely resembled the 18-year-old who had walked away from home carrying one duffel bag and absolutely no plan beyond the next block. My service dress blues were pressed to a mirror-shine ribbons arranged in perfect practiced rows, one silver star gleaming on each shoulder board, the star of a Rear Admiral lower half earned across 26 years. 6 of them enlisted, and every single year after that fought for the hard way, one promotion board at a time. Would he even recognize the woman standing in that uniform? Would he manage, even for a moment, to see past the 18-year-old daughter he had cast aside so long ago? I made myself stop asking. I wasn't going to that gala for him. I was going because the silence between us had already gone on far longer than it ever should have, and because certain truths, once they've grown strong enough to finally stand entirely on their own, insist on standing directly in the light where everyone can see them clearly. The ballroom was dressed like something pulled straight out of collective memory itself. American flags lining the length of the stage, polished floors, throwing back the light of a dozen low-hanging chandeliers. A string quartet playing something soft enough to sound almost at moments like a hymn. Veterans filled round tables in dress uniforms heavy with ribbons earned across decades. Families leaned close together at those same tables, murmuring the particular mixture of pride and unspoken grief that fills every room exactly like this one every single time. My boots struck the marble floor steadily as I walked in, alone. the way I had walked into most rooms for the better part of 26 years now. Heads turned as I passed. A few people near the entrance rose almost instinctively at the sight of my rank insignia, their bodies responding before their minds had even fully finished processing what exactly they were looking at. And then I saw them. My father, silver-haired now, but still carrying that same rigid, immovable posture, chest decorated in ribbons he wore, even now, like armor against the world. My mother beside him, her face thinner with age than I remembered, eyes widening the instant they found me across the room. My brother Tyler seated a few chairs down, a drink in one hand. He didn't appear to actually be drinking. I gave a polite nod in their general direction, hoping to slide quietly into a seat somewhere near the back without disturbing the room's careful rhythm. For just a moment, before anything else happened, I let myself actually look at him, really look, the way I hadn't allowed myself to in 26 years. He seemed smaller than the man who lived in my memory, which struck me as strange, since in every version of him I'd carried across every deployment, every promotion, every empty chair at every ceremony. He had always loomed impossibly large, filling doorways, filling rooms, filling the whole of my expectations for what love was supposed to cost. Here, in this ballroom, under these chandeliers, he was simply an aging man in a dress uniform, 2 sizes looser than it had probably fit him a decade ago. I felt, for one disorienting second, something close to pity. It didn't last. My father stood instead. "You're not welcome here," he said loud enough to still every conversation within 30 feet in every direction, and then his hand came up fast, and the slap landed, and the sound cracked small and dry across that enormous ceiling, and I stood there with my cheek burning white-hot, refusing, after everything, after 26 long years, to give him the reaction he had clearly been hunting for since the moment he first saw my face across that crowded room. For one full second, nothing in that entire room moved at all. Then Elena Cruz rose from a table near the front, silver-haired herself now, and beside her a row of men and women I recognized instantly, some retired, some still serving, all of them people I had led, served alongside, bled beside across 26 years of a career my own family had never once bothered to follow. One by one, and then suddenly all together, they rose to their feet. Chairs scraped back across the marble in a wave that rolled steadily through the entire hall, table by table, row by row. Someone near the front of the room, I found out only much later that it was a young petty officer who had served under my command for exactly 4 years earlier, and never once forgot it, called out the words in a voice that cracked audibly under the sheer weight of them. "Admiral on deck." It is, in the Navy, one of the oldest and simplest signals there is. Attention. Respect. A superior officer has entered this space, and every person present will acknowledge it, immediately, without question. 200 people who had most of them never once met me before that evening rose to their feet without fully understanding why, their bodies responding to something buried deep in that call before their conscious minds had even finished catching up. My father's raised hand hovered uselessly in the air, forgotten entirely as though it no longer quite belonged to the rest of him. A woman near the back of the hall rose next, silver-haired, steady on her feet despite her age. "She pulled my son out of Kandahar under direct fire," she said, her voice carrying clean and clear across the sudden silence. "He is alive today because of her, and nothing else. She planned and ran Operation Blackline," said a man 3 tables over, his voice equally steady. "Half the people standing in this room right now owe her something we can never fully repay her for." More voices rose after that, overlapping now, each one contributing some small piece of a career my father had never once asked about, and by every indication, had never once wanted to know anything about. Somewhere near the middle of the room, an older man in a navy blazer, leaning heavily on a cane, added his own voice to the rest without needing to be prompted. "She wrote to my wife herself," he said, "after our son didn't come home from that same convoy. sat with her on the phone for an hour, on her own time, just so she wouldn't hear it secondhand from a stranger reading off a form. His voice caught just slightly on the last few words. That's not nothing. That was never nothing. I hadn't known he was in that room. I hadn't known until that exact moment that anyone besides his wife had ever known I'd made that call at all. I did not say a single word through any of it. I didn't need to. My silence had become over 26 years its own particular kind of command, and this room understood it perfectly without any translation required. Hold the line. Wait. Let the truth finish doing the work that silence has always done better than shouting ever could. My father's face had gone the exact color of ash by then. She's nothing, he tried one final time, but his voice cracked audibly on the second word, and nobody left standing in that hall believed him. Not anymore, not after everything they had just heard with their own ears. I did not expect what happened next, not even slightly. Tyler stood up. My brother, who had not spoken a single word directly to me in 26 years, who had smirked from a doorway the night I was thrown out of our childhood home with nothing but a duffel bag, rose slowly from his chair near our parents, and for one brief moment I genuinely thought he might simply turn and walk straight out of that ballroom, the way he had quietly walked out of every difficult conversation our family had ever truly needed to have. Instead, he looked first at our father and then directly at me, and his voice, when it finally came, was quieter than I expected, but somehow carried further than anything else in that entire room. I used to check on her, he said, to the room as much as to our father, every couple of years, called some of her old commands, never once left my actual name. He swallowed hard, visibly. I was too scared of you my whole life to even say her name out loud inside our own house, Dad. That's on me. That's mine to carry, not hers. He turned fully toward me then, and for the first time in 26 years, my brother's eyes met mine without a single trace of the old smirk anywhere in them. I'm sorry, Harper. I should have said that to you a long, long time ago, instead of just quietly checking that you were still alive. I did not have an answer ready for that. 26 years of hard-won, carefully constructed composure, and my brother's quiet, unrehearsed apology very nearly broke straight through it anyway, right there in front of 200 witnesses. My father tried once more to reclaim the room, his voice reaching desperately for the old authority that had worked reliably on me for 18 years and had apparently, over the last several minutes, stopped working on absolutely anyone else in that hall. This is absurd, he said, louder now, almost pleading beneath the anger. I am a decorated officer of the United States Army. I will not stand here and be lectured by Colonel Bennett. My voice, when I finally used it, was quiet. It didn't need to be anything more than that. The room had already gone silent enough by then to hear a single coin drop onto the marble floor. You just struck a superior officer of the United States Navy in full view of 200 witnesses. That is not, and has never been, purely a family matter. That is a direct violation of Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and as a retired officer still receiving military benefits, you remain fully subject to that code under circumstances exactly like this one. I turned my head slightly toward the edge of the stage. Standing near the wing in the dark blue brassard of the Navy's Master-at-Arms was Chief Ortiz, part of the base security detail quietly assigned to the gala that evening. The kind of steady, watchful presence most people stop consciously noticing after the first 10 minutes of any formal event, right up until the exact moment they need him. Chief Ortiz, I said, my voice carrying easily across the stillness, please escort Colonel Bennett out and take a full statement. I'll follow up with the appropriate authorities first thing in the morning. Chief Ortiz stepped forward without a flicker of hesitation anywhere in his expression, the way genuinely well-trained people always do the moment the exact scenario all their training was built for finally arrives. Yes, ma'am. My father's face drained entirely of whatever color it had left in it. The proud colonel who had spent my entire childhood as the undisputed, unquestioned master of every single room he ever walked into, suddenly looked small beneath those chandeliers. His ribbons gleaming pointlessly now on a chest that no longer commanded anything at all in that room or in this story. He didn't fight it. I think somewhere underneath 40 years of fury and pride. Some quieter part of him, the part that had spent an entire career inside a chain of command he understood better than almost anyone, recognized that the order had already been given cleanly and correctly, and that arguing with it now would only make the smallness that much more visible to everyone watching. As Chief Ortiz led my father steadily toward the side exit, my mother rose from her chair, hesitating for a long moment, one hand pressed hard against her own mouth. "Harper," she said, and it was, I realized with a small jolt, the very first time she had said my name directly to my face in 26 years. I should have done something that night, every single night after that one too. I looked at her for a long moment, longer than I might have needed to. I thought about the dish towel twisted tight in her hands in that kitchen doorway so many years ago. I thought about every promotion ceremony I had ever stood through where her seat had stayed conspicuously empty, not out of any real malice on her part. I understood now, standing here, but out of a fear she had never once in all those years found the courage to walk straight through. "I know, Mom," I said finally. "Not forgiveness, not yet, not fully. That would take considerably longer than a single evening if it ever came at all. But an opening at least. A door left deliberately unlatched instead of bolted shut. We can talk whenever you're ready to." She nodded, tears sliding freely now down a face that looked, in that particular moment, older than I had ever quite let myself imagine it. As the room began to settle, the applause still rolling in uneven waves, I caught sight of a face near the back that made my breath catch for an entirely different reason. Danny Kessler, cane in hand, his youngest daughter, the one named for a river in Kandahar province, standing beside him in a dress far too fancy for a girl who couldn't have been older than 9. Both of them clapping harder than almost anyone else in that hall. He caught my eye and gave me the same crooked grin he'd given me in that hangar bay years earlier, and mouthed, silently, across the whole width of the room, "Still here, ma'am." I hadn't known he was going to be there. I found out later that Elena had quietly arranged for a dozen people from across my career to be seated throughout the hall that night, not telling any of them exactly why. Only that it might matter for them to be present. She'd read the invitation list before I had. She'd understood, before I fully let myself understand it, exactly what kind of evening this might become. "I don't do things by accident, Bennett," she told me afterward when I asked her about it, sipping a club soda at the edge of the now thinning crowd. "Never have. You should know that about me by now." I turned finally and let my boots strike the marble steadily on my way toward the door, the same unhurried rhythm they had carried me through convoys and hospital corridors and 26 years of rooms that had never once, until tonight, been built with any intention of welcoming me. The crowd parted without needing to be asked, and the applause that rose up behind me as I walked wasn't merely polite. It rolled through that entire hall like something carrying real physical weight, the particular kind of sound that isn't meant for a performance at all, but for an entire life, finally witnessed all at once in full. Without anything left hidden, at the doorway I paused just long enough to let it wash completely over me, not as any kind of prize, because I had stopped needing prizes somewhere around my second deployment, but as proof. Proof that the version of me my father had tried to bury inside a duffel bag 26 years earlier had, against every possible expectation he'd ever had of me, survived, had built something real, had become, somehow, someone 200 strangers were willing to rise to their feet for without anyone having to ask them twice. Tyler caught up to me near the entrance, his tie slightly loosened now, his eyes still faintly red. "Can I call you?" he asked. "Actually call you, I mean, not the way I used to, the checking from a distance never leaving my name." "Yeah," I said, and something in my chest that had stayed tightly wound for 26 years loosened, just slightly, for the very first time. You can call me Tyler. The formal proceedings against my father, technically an Article 32 hearing since as a retiree he remained subject to certain provisions of the code, concluded with a formal reprimand and a reduction of several Veteran Association privileges, though not, as Navy legal counsel explained to me at some length, a full revocation of his retired rank, which turns out to be considerably rarer than most people ever assume it is. It wasn't the outcome the angriest part of me might have wanted at 19, or even the version of me who stood in that ballroom 6 months ago with my cheek still burning. But it was accountability, entered permanently onto the record, undeniable, the kind that can't simply be shouted away, or waited out in silence either. My mother and I speak now roughly once a month, sometimes a little more often than that. It isn't easy, and I don't expect it to become easy anytime soon. 26 years doesn't dissolve inside a handful of phone calls, however honest those calls might be. But she has started slowly and a little clumsily to ask real questions about my work, about Danny Kessler's daughter and her latest birthday photograph, about the sheer number of people who rose to their feet in that ballroom for a daughter she had spent far too long refusing to see clearly. Tyler visited me at my duty station last month. We didn't talk much about our father at all, as it turned out. Mostly we talked about nothing in particular. A baseball game, neither of us had strong feelings about our mother's garden. The particular strangeness of being related to someone you're still after all these years, in the middle of learning how to actually know. It was, I think, the first genuinely ordinary conversation the two of us had shared since I was 17 years old. He asked me, near the end of that visit, standing on the small back porch of my quarters with 2 beers going warm between us, why I'd never once tried to reach out to him across all those years myself. "Because you were in the room the night he threw me out," I told him honestly, "and you smiled." I watched something in his face fold inward at that, and I made myself keep going, because he deserved the whole truth, and not just the comfortable half of it. "I know you were 17. I know it wasn't really about me. Not entirely. But that's the picture I carried with me for 26 years, Tyler. You, smiling, while I got sent out that door." He didn't argue with me, and he didn't ask me to take it back. He just nodded, slowly, and said, "That's fair. I've got a version of that same night I carry around too. I'm not proud of mine either." Then, after a long, quiet pause, he added, "I'd like the chance to give you a different picture, if you'll let me have the time to build one." I told him I would. I meant it, though I also understood, the way I understand most things now, that meaning it and having it fully happen were 2 very different distances to travel, and that we had only just started walking. As for my father, I haven't spoken to him since that night at the gala, and I honestly can't say with any certainty whether I will again anytime soon. Some doors close for good reason, and I've learned the hard way, across a very long career, that forcing one open again before you're truly ready only tears the hinges clean off for good. But I think about that ballroom often, more often than I expected I would. Not the slab itself. That particular sting faded far faster than I ever anticipated it would. What stays with me months later is the sound of 200 chairs sliding back across marble all at once, without hesitation for a woman. A room full of strangers decided entirely on their own, without anyone asking them to. Was worth standing up for. That, I've come to understand, is the real inheritance I carry forward now. Not the silver star resting on my shoulder, though I earned every last ounce of that the hard way too. Over 26 years nobody handed me for free. The people, the family I built out of essentially nothing, out of exhaustion and gunfire and long nights spent writing letters to parents who would never again hear a door open in their own house. A family that chose me, deliberately, over and over again, in a way my own blood relatives never quite managed to for most of my life. Sometimes on quiet duty nights when the bass has gone still and the only sound is the water against the pier, I think about the 18-year-old girl walking away from a porch light with nothing but a duffel bag and a promise she wasn't even sure yet how to keep. I wish I could tell her what I know now, that the promise wasn't really about proving anyone wrong at all. Not in the end. It was about becoming someone worth the years it would take to get there. She couldn't have known that yet. She only knew how to keep walking, one dark block at a time, toward a life she hadn't met yet, but somehow already trusted was waiting for her. I was Harper Bennett, the daughter my father once said was nothing at all. I built a life loud enough in the end that even his silence could never fully erase it. And in the end, none of it was ever really revenge. It was simply the truth, finally standing all the way in the light where it had always belonged.